Story number one. I've always believed that if something wants to be seen, it will find a way to show itself, no matter how much you try to ignore it. I learned that lesson during my deployment as a Marine, stationed stateside after Beirut. My shift was the graveyard patrol at the Beirut bombing memorial. Almost everyone expects to hear some creepy stuff about a job like that, but for the longest time, it was just plain boring. Sure, I was alone in a remote cemetery, surrounded by thick woods, but I kind of liked it. It was peaceful, the air was cool, and except for the occasional animal skittering around, nothing weird ever happened there. This one shift, though, yeah, that one turned everything on its head. I remember walking along the back fence, making my rounds like usual, just half awake and thinking about getting home and jumping into bed. Suddenly, I heard this humming. At first, I thought maybe it was a bird or the wind, but then I realized it was definitely a human, and it sounded like a woman. She was humming some weird old melody, slow and soft. The sound just floated between the trees, and there was something about it that made my skin crawl in a way I can't really describe. I tried to come up with a normal explanation. Maybe someone was out for a midnight walk, though who'd even do that way out here? Or maybe my brain was just messing with me, since it was so late, and there's always stories about cemeteries and ghosts. Still, I couldn't help it. I followed the sound, picking my way through this thick patch of vines and brush growing beneath a massive tree. The further I got, the weirder everything felt. With every step, the air changed. It was charged, making my skin buzz as if a storm was about to break overhead. It reminded me of standing too close to a live wire. It was actually lifting the hairs on my head, arms, and the back of my neck. At first, I spotted this blue light shining through the leaves, pulsing in a creepy way you just don't expect to see in an old graveyard. When I peeled back the mesh of ivy, I found the source, an ancient headstone, barely upright, pitted with age and weather. No name, only a deep carved cross, burning blue. I pushed some of the brush aside and saw an old weathered headstone. It didn't even have a name on it, just this huge cross carved into the marble. The cross was glowing bright blue, almost like someone had installed a neon bulb inside it. The humming, too, got super loud out of nowhere. Suddenly, it wasn't just one woman. It sounded like an entire crowd humming, all muddy and echoing, but coming from the same place. It flooded my ears, all fuzzy and layered. The blue was so bright that my eyes watered. My teeth hurt. I don't remember turning to run. One moment I was standing there, half hypnotized, and the next I was back in the parking lot, bent over and wheezing, my heart jackhammering in my chest. I fumbled for my radio, desperate to anchor myself to another human voice. Static, then nothing. When my relief finally arrived, he swore the radio had been silent all night. No activity, no calls, like I'd been talking to myself the whole time. I should have let it go, but something kept pulling at me, a curiosity that felt more like an infection. Days passed, and then finally I went back. The area looked completely different in daylight. Mundane, almost laughably ordinary. I found the same tree, the same lonely grave. The headstone sat at the tree's base, crusted with dirt and green. It was just chipped old marble with no glow, no marks except for the cross. I ran my hands all over it, but there were no scorch marks, no hidden bulbs or wiring. The humming was completely gone too. That's when things got weirder. I noticed these vines that had been hanging loosely from the tree, now bunched up near my feet. In a split second, they twisted around my ankles, tight and cold. It wasn't like a tripwire or something you just get tangled in. It felt like something was grabbing me. Before I could even react, the blue light came back. It was so bright it felt like it burned into my eyes. This was broad daylight, but still the whole place went washed out, blinded by this freakish blue. I swear I couldn't move at all. The next thing I knew, I woke up flat on my back, the sun already setting. My watch had stopped working. My throat burned as if I'd swallowed smoke. The vines were limp again, my legs shaky and covered in dirt. Sun on my face, birds chirping, not a single hint that anything had happened. I limped back to my Jeep, every sound unnaturally loud. The rest of the day was a blur. I didn't really talk to anyone, didn't even eat. I just kind of stared at nothing, doubting myself. That night I went home and splashed water on my face trying to shake off the whole thing. That's when I saw blood start to leak from my eyes. My eyes stung sharply. It wasn't a lot, but just enough to freak me out. I panicked, rubbing at my face, blinked again, and when I looked up, nothing. No marks, no redness, no trace of blood, just my own pale, shaken face staring back. I wanted to believe it was nothing. A microbleed maybe? Allergies, some burst vessels from the stress. Maybe I pressed too hard on my eyes without realizing it. I went to a doctor. He did all the tests. Nothing out of the ordinary. A rational part of me still insists there was an explanation. Maybe underground wiring from old lighting installations. Maybe the vines contained static discharge from some weird natural reaction. Maybe I passed out from exhaustion and hallucinated the rest. But every time I close my eyes, I see that glow. The blue flashes. It's etched in my vision, the way bright lights leave shadows on your eyes. And sometimes, just before I drift off, I hear that faint, layered humming again. Every so often, when the room is dark and the air gets still and heavy, I get that electric, crawling feeling again, like something's just waiting out there. And sometimes I wonder if maybe, just maybe, there really is something about that headstone that you don't want to notice too closely. Story number 2. I was stationed at a small combat outpost in Afghanistan back in 2014, middle of nowhere. Bare sand, dust storms, and silence that felt too heavy for open air. My shift usually started at 2 a.m., operating the raid camera system. Routine surveillance, monitors, heat signatures, endless static. Nothing ever happened out there. I was hunched over the monitors, sipping burnt coffee and tracing the camera over the north wall when I caught movement at the edge of the display. I remember growing and leaning in. It showed up on the IR feed first, just a faint heat signature pacing near the HESCO barriers. At first I figured it was a bear wandering too close, but then I zoomed in and the shape didn't make sense. This thing was thinner, its limbs way too long, and it moved weird, kind of bunched up on itself. The IR lit it up in faded yellow and red. There was no sound, but the thing just kept circling, pacing in restless lines. I radioed the RTO, asked him to have someone check it out. Quick reaction force. 3 guys in full kit. The team went out in full gear, sweeping the area with their rifles and lights. I watched them in split screen, normal light, and IR, walking straight toward the thing. It looked so normal, you could almost believe it was fine. But then strange things began happening. On the IR, the guys were maybe 5 meters away from the thing, walking right toward it. But on the regular video, there was nothing on the ground. No visual, no sound, no contact, just gravel and the shimmer of heat. I remember getting this sharp, cold feeling in my stomach. I kept expecting someone to yell, or maybe the animal to bolt. But nothing happened. The QRF guys just stood there, rifles at the high ready, sweeping their lights along the fence. The thing was right under them on my monitor, circling in jerky little half steps, almost like it was dragging a busted leg. They radioed back, said there was nothing outside. I watched as they finished their sweep. On IR, they literally passed through the edge of whatever that thing was, and then shuffled back inside, grumbling. As soon as the door shut, the creature stopped, just froze for half a heartbeat, then started moving again. This pacing, endless, and agitated for the next 2 hours. And I can't say I heard any sounds coming from the thing itself. Not growling, not even the crunch of gravel, just the low hiss of radio static and every now and then. At some point, I realized my hands were cramping from holding the coffee cup so tight. I started noticing little details. The way the thing's eyes didn't reflect any light at all, just these dull black pits that soaked up the IR glow without blinking. The wrongness of its body, a sort of double time, knees and elbows all bending inward instead of out. Its movements were jerky. I tried to justify it. Dust and heat haze could do weird things on thermal. Maybe the camera was glitching, though it had never glitched quite like this before. But I couldn't shake this growing, oily coldness spreading through my insides as the thing kept pacing, not leaving, not even slowing down. A couple of times I adjusted the focus, switched viewing modes. Still there, clearer on IR than normal light. I checked the camera housing. Wasn't broken, wasn't smeared or dirty. No other targets or signatures coming up. I played with the other cams, but only that one, facing north, caught the thing at all. At 4 a.m., it just left, slipped beyond the range of the camera, fading into the dunes. I watched, waiting for a silhouette to show up in the pre-dawn, but nothing. Checked the ground after the shift, too. No tracks, no disturbed sand. But a few nights later, it came back. Same hour, 0200, same direction, north wall. I recognized the movement right away, that weird half-human gait. This time, I didn't call it in. I wanted to watch first. The figure crawled closer to the outer barrier. It didn't try to get in, didn't react to the occasional spotlight sweep. Just circled. The feed glitched a couple of times when it got too close. IR fuzzing like static over water. And when it passed one of the floodlights, the area around it darkened for a split second, like the camera's light sensors couldn't process what it was. After about an hour, it backed away, vanishing the same way as before. The next week, the pacing got closer. A few times I'd leave the camera feed running and step outside for a smoke. The moment I stepped into the night, everything felt thick, not heavy, but muffled, like the air had weight. The sound from the generators and the low hum of the floodlights felt distant, flattened. I never saw anything with my naked eye, but once when I flicked my cigarette and turned back to go inside, I thought I saw the dirt shift near the wall. Just one ripple through the sand, like something moving under it. When I went back in, the figure was right beneath the tower in the feed. The thermal outline was sharper now, almost too sharp. Long arms, head tilted up. The heat signature wasn't flickering anymore. It just stood there. I couldn't move for a few seconds. I don't know why. It felt like if I blinked, it'd vanish. Or worse, not vanish. Then slowly it crawled backward into the dark, limbs folding wrong as it went. A week before my rotation ended, the system went fully down for 5 minutes. Black screen, total failure. When it came back, the feed showed static for a few seconds. Whatever it was had crawled halfway up the barrier. The camera auto-zoomed. The head was wrong. No eyes. Just texture, like wet cloth pressed over a skull. There was something hanging from its chest, like strips of fabric or maybe skin. I blinked and it was gone. I told myself it was interference. IR ghosts. The kind of crap that happens when heat signatures overlap or data corrupts. But deep down, I knew the system didn't create shapes. It only reads what's there. Sometimes I think it was nothing. Maybe a sandstorm distortion. Maybe a dying animal's heat signature stretched by bad sensors. But the memory stuck. All sharp angles and wrong movement in those empty eyes. I never saw it again. But sometimes when I'm lying half awake at night, I remember how it moved, how it followed, and how the guys outside couldn't see a thing even when it was right under their feet. It doesn't help that the IR camera worked fine the rest of the deployment. Every so often, I'll still wake up with the thick taste of dust and bitter coffee in my mouth, convinced I'll glance at the wall and see that impossible shape, just waiting in the shadows. Sometimes I wonder if, out there in the dark, there are things we just weren't meant to see. Story number 3. Back in the early 2000s, my wife and I moved to Fort Worth, Gordon, Georgia, and ended up living in one of those old, squat little houses in the military quarters. If you know military housing, you get the basic picture. Old linoleum, creaky plumbing, baseboard heaters that never really worked right. Everything about that place just felt used up, stained somehow by thousands of families who cycled through before you. The quarters had a small yard, nothing fancy. The back door opened up onto a scrubby patch of grass, sloping down toward clusters of pines. Decent enough in safe suburban daylight, but I hated those woods at night. Evenings, I'd step out to smoke or take the trash, but I always had that chase dream feeling, prickling down between my shoulder blades, like something unseen was circling the fence while I hurried back inside. Sometimes the pines would go completely quiet all at once. No crickets, no frogs, just hush. Our daughter was about 3. New places don't seem to bother little kids, but almost immediately after we moved in, she clung to us more at night. She was a sweet, chatty kid who would talk to anyone. Stuffed animals, dolls, the air. For a while that didn't bother me. Then she started mentioning the red-eye boy. She said he would sit in the corner of her ceiling, knees pulled to his chest, talking to her softly while she played. I thought it was her imagination, maybe something she picked up from cartoons, but she was consistent. Every time, same corner, same description, always smiling, always talking. Not every night, only sometimes, but often enough, I'd catch her laughing up at the empty corner as I read books. I tried not to freak myself out, but I started quietly scanning her room after she fell asleep. The first time I went to check, I half expected a spider, but that corner was spotless, just a yellowish water stain spreading across the plaster. I work odd shifts, so I'd be out in the yard late sometimes, maybe 2 or 3 a.m., in those hours when the whole post feels almost underwater. Thick air, everything dead quiet. That's when the feeling ramped up. I'd be dragging the trash can to the curb, and there would be these strange, rustling footsteps just out of sight, always one beat behind me. Once, when the outside light was fried and everything was pitch black, I caught this overwhelming whiff of sulfur all around the back fence, like burnt matches and old eggs. I almost dropped the garbage bag, slammed the door, and felt like I left someone standing out in the dark who didn't belong. A flat certainty in my gut that if I turned around, I'd catch eyes where there shouldn't be any. Inside, my wife said she never noticed anything, but sometimes our smoke alarm would go off at exactly 3:14 a.m., even if the batteries were new. No smoke, no reason, just that piercing shriek right above my daughter's door. She'd sleep through it. I stopped sleeping well, I'll admit. Things got weirder inside. My daughter started waking up with her toys scattered in careful concentric circles under that same corner, the nightlight burning out twice in a week, and then one day my daughter woke up with scratch marks at her temples. She said that it was from the Red Eye Boys games. Sometimes, right as I was falling asleep, I'd hear the scraping of furniture or padded thumps from her room, like someone dropped from the ceiling and landed just wrong. Every time I checked, she'd be sound asleep. The scariest moment came one afternoon when I went to pick up laundry off my daughter's floor. From that same ceiling corner, her corner, I swear there was a stretch of wall that looked smudged, almost oily, as if someone had pressed a palm or something bigger, shaped like fingers, again and again into the plaster. I convinced myself it was just old leak stains, wiped at it, but the smear didn't come off. The next morning it was gone. From then on, I couldn't shake the sense that the house was aware of me, like it noticed when I moved from one room to another. Sometimes I'd catch faint flickers of shadow in the corner of my eyes. Not figures, just brief distortions. The following weekend, I decided to sleep on the couch near her room, just to reassure myself. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the creaking sound of the ceiling joist shifting. I thought maybe it was temperature changes, but it was rhythmic, creak, pause, creak, like something was moving across the beams, right above where I lay. A few nights I found my own reflection in the window glass, completely off. Shadow blurred, face drawn longer than I remember, and always behind me in the glass, two faint glimmers of red, like bloodstains diluted in water. We moved out 9 months later. Last week I drove by the quarters on a whim while passing through Augusta. The house hadn't changed, but the pines behind it had been cut down, just brown stumps now, an open view to the barracks. It looked less menacing in daylight, but I couldn't help feeling like the house was watching, holding its breath for night to fall again. Looking back, it's easy to stitch together all the weird stuff and claim something supernatural. I run through the causes: old wiring, family stress, sleep deprivation, maybe even black mold messing with our heads. Lots of ways to explain each thing away individually, but none of those explanations settle the feeling, that cold, hunted certainty I still carry, years after we left. I've lived in plenty of houses since then, never felt anything close to that sick, focused attention in the dark. I don't know what my daughter actually saw, or if there was ever really a red-eyed boy curled up in the shadows over her bed. Maybe it was kids' imagination clashing against an old creaky house. Still, whenever I go by those quarters, it doesn't feel like an old home. It feels like a mouth still chewing, waiting for someone else to move in, to notice what's pressed up in the ceiling corners after midnight. just out of reach and just out of reason. Story number 4. I was stationed at Pearl Harbor about 7 years ago, serving as the command duty officer for the night shift. Nothing unusual about that. Long nights, empty corridors, and the hum of fluorescent lights that always seem louder than they should be. That particular night still makes me uneasy whenever I think about it. It was around 2300. I had finished my final rounds and realized I'd left a few folders in my office on the far end of the administrative floor. The building was old, one of those World War II era structures that had been renovated but still carried the weight of its history. The floor plan was open, long rows of desks stretching across the space, with just one light glowing in the far back, near my office. The air conditioning had shut off for the night, leaving that still, heavy kind of silence where every little sound becomes suspicious. My footsteps echoed faintly against the tile, the sound bouncing off the glass partitions. I remember thinking the place felt emptier than usual, like the walls themselves were listening. About halfway across the floor, I heard it, a faint, rhythmic clicking. It took a few seconds to register, the sound of a typewriter, not a keyboard, not the clack of a modern machine, but that sharp mechanical sound. My heart stopped at the sound. Most of the people here had never even seen a typewriter, but I grew up with one at my grandmother's house, and sound memories stick. The sound was distant but steady, coming from the far side of the room, just beyond where the light was shining. At first, I thought maybe one of the admin staff had stayed late, or someone from archives was working through the night, but the sound didn't make sense. No one used typewriters anymore, and I knew everyone had left hours ago. Then came the whispering. Not words exactly, just a low murmur, like someone was talking softly to themselves while reading or dictating. It was muffled, as if coming through a thin wall, but there were no walls. It was all open space. I just froze. The typing would go for a few seconds, and then there was the almost whisper. All of this was weirdly rhythmic. Type, mumble, type. Then silence. Repeat. Could it have been the pipes? God knows this building has the worst pipes, and they like to make themselves known late at night. But I've never heard pipes do anything that sounded just like typing, or anyone's voice. The hair on my arms rose instantly. My first instinct was to freeze, to listen carefully. I wanted to believe it was some machine left on, maybe the HVAC making noises again. But then the clicking stopped. Dead silence. And then a single key pressed down, slowly, followed by another. It sounded deliberate, almost hesitant, like someone was typing words they weren't sure they should write. I told myself I'd just walk past, not look over, and get my folders and get the hell out. But as I tried to move, this wave of static electricity swept over me. Hairs up, skin crawling, almost buzzing in my ears and up my arms. It was like, I don't know, oxygen got thinner on that spot, and I was stuck in molasses. The air just felt denser. I can't describe it except to say every cell in my body was on red alert. Feet moving, slower than I wanted, every part of me hyper-focused on not making any noise. I could still hear the typing, right at the limit of my hearing. Each click boomed in my spine. I could almost see where it was coming from. One of the old desks at the back, partly illuminated by that dying ceiling light. I didn't look. I think I would have lost it if I saw an actual shape sitting there. I backed away, moving as quietly as I could, my eyes never leaving that faint pool of light in the distance. And then, before leaving, for just a split second, I thought I saw movement. The faint silhouette of someone sitting at a desk, shoulders hunched forward, motionless. I turned right around before I hit the light and was out of there so fast I slammed the heavy door harder than I meant to. The typewriter sound cut off the second I left the floor, just vanished. Down the hallway, out of breath. I kept telling myself someone must have come in early, maybe one of the night watch or some junior typing up last-minute forms, but my body wasn't buying any of it. I stood for a good 10 minutes by the elevator, feeling this migraine coming on from how hard my heart had pounded. I had some wild theories, but then I remembered the old legends, the kind about offices built on bones, about buildings filtered with ghosts nobody wants to acknowledge. I sat in my car for a good 5 minutes before starting the engine. I told myself it was nothing, Some leftover mechanical noise from the old wiring, maybe the janitor playing the radio somewhere. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. I couldn't fall asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing that lone desk under the flickering light. Something bent over an old machine, hands working keys that haven't existed here in decades. The next morning, I came in early to make sure everything was in order. I half expected to find the old typewriter or some relic that explained the noise, but there was nothing. The desks were empty, dustless, and silent. When I casually joked about it to one of the women in our department, she went pale. She's an old school local, been here the longest. I told her I thought I'd heard a typewriter and someone mumbling late at night. She got serious, looking at me wide-eyed as if I had mentioned something terrible. She then asked me if I knew the story. According to her, during the Pearl Harbor attack, one of the secretaries on that same floor had been killed, right at her desk. She'd been typing up a report when the building was hit by shrapnel. She used to sit at the desk where my office was now. I laughed it off in front of her. But that night, when I walked back into my office, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. The faint smell of carbon paper, that old ink and oil smell typewriters used to have. It lingered in the air, even though no one had used one there in decades. But I haven't shaken it. One time I brushed my hand over the desk just to prove to myself it was only wood and old varnish, but my skin broke out in goosebumps for no reason. Maybe it's just my old keyboard. Maybe it's in my head. But I can never shake the feeling that someone's still finishing their report. Still typing, still on duty, somewhere deep in that old building where time hasn't quite moved on. And every time I hear that sound, all the hairs on my neck rise again, just like they did that night. Story number 5. I'm a reservist in the U.S. military. This happened a few months ago during my last week of basic training. I'm not the superstitious type, and honestly, I've seen enough weird stuff during drills to know how the mind plays tricks when you're cold, wet, and running on zero sleep. But what I saw that night, what I felt, still makes me turn on the lights before I sleep. We were in the field doing trench warfare training. It was pouring for 2 straight days, the kind of cold rain that soaks through every layer, no matter how tough you think you are. Everything smelled like mud and sweat. My fingers were numb, my boots were heavy, and the sky never really got bright again after sunset. By the 4th night, sleep deprivation had set in. We weren't allowed to rest, just rotate between guard shifts and digging. I was paired with 2 other guys in a trench that barely fit us. The dirt walls oozed water, and the ground sloshed when we moved. It was miserable, but in that weird military way, kind of satisfying too. Around 0200 hours, the rain stopped suddenly. No wind, no thunder, just silence. It's hard to explain, but that silence wasn't peaceful. It was like the air itself had gone still. We were each taking turns with the NVG, night vision goggles, watching the field ahead. Nothing ever really moves out there except trees, or maybe rabbits if you're lucky. When it was my turn, I adjusted the strap, leaned against the trench wall, and started scanning. Through night vision goggles, everything glows green and flat, so shapes look weirdly alive. I was moving in slow arcs when I noticed something. At first, I thought it was one of the other guys from a nearby trench crawling over, but the movement was off. Too fast, too low. I focused, and that's when I froze. There was something crawling out from the tree line. Middle distance, probably 20-30 meters away. It was shaped like a person, but all wrong. Gangly arms, back arched all the way up in a crab walk, jerking along with these little pops and twitches, unnaturally silent for something that big in mud. And then, it turned its head towards me, straightening up a little. Its face, though, I just about pissed myself. Even now, I'm not sure how to describe it. Its skin looked too pale for that cold, along with the 2 long, twisted horns like the antlers of something that should not exist. But the worst were its eyes, bright blue, practically glowing, burning right through the green filter from the NVGs. It just stared, full on, no blinking, no nothing. I felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the rain, like something crawling up my spine. I almost yelled for the others, but the sound got stuck in my throat. When I blinked, it was gone. Just like that. I pulled the goggles off and rubbed my eyes. My heart was hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. I figured it was exhaustion, maybe a trick of the light. I even laughed a little under my breath until I noticed the faint sound of something slapping the mud behind the trench, like someone crawling, dragging their hands through wet dirt. I could feel something watching us. The air in the trench felt heavier, thicker, like I was underwater, every breath strained. We stayed on watch till dawn, and then just before sunrise, we all started hearing animal noises, braying, guttural sounds echoing through the woods. I didn't tell the others what I'd seen, but I barely breathed the rest of the night. Things got weirder as the day went on. A few of us found deep gouges in the mud near the latrine line. Not boot prints, not anything I could recognize, just long, deep grooves like something clawed its way in and out. That night it rained again. Around 1 a.m., I heard scratching, and that's when I noticed something odd. There were handprints in the mud, human-sized but too long. The fingers were narrow and curved, and the prints went on for about 20 feet, leading into a patch of trees. I told myself someone must have crawled through earlier, maybe testing something, but I couldn't stop staring at how fresh those prints looked, like they'd just been pressed into the soil seconds ago. Later, I tried to sleep for a few minutes in the corner of the trench. I must have dozed off because I woke up to the feeling of someone brushing past my boots. The trench was pitch black, and I could hear shallow breathing right above me. I thought it was one of the guys switching positions, but when I flicked on my flashlight, there was no one there, just the wet earth. Morning came, and one of the other trenches, maybe 50 yards away, reported missing gear. Rations, gloves, even a rifle strap. They joked about raccoons, but when I checked with my NVG later, I saw drag marks in the mud leading away from that spot too. On the last day, we were assigned our last night duty. The field was quiet except for the distant hum of generators. I scanned slowly, trying not to think about what I'd seen before. Then near a cluster of trees, I caught something. Movement again, same distance as the first time. It was crouched this time, half hidden behind a mound. The body was unmistakably human, but the head, it twitched too fast like it couldn't hold still. The blue glow from the eyes cut through the fog, and then it did something that froze me solid. It tilted its head back, and for a split second, I saw its face clearly through the lens. The same horns, the same distorted jaw, but it looked like skin was stretched over something else, like it didn't belong there. The figure started moving, low, crawling, almost running, straight toward our trench. I yanked off the NVG, shouted for a stand to, and raised my rifle. But when the others looked, there was nothing, just fog and mud. Later that day, after our duty, just as we were packing up, I found a twisted chunk of bone or wood, stained muddy black, stuck in the side of our trench where I'd first seen the figure. Could have been from a deer, maybe. Plenty of weird stuff gets swept up in the south when it rains. Still, nobody else had seen it yesterday, and it was wedged in so deep I had to dig it out with my boot. We never saw anything again after that night. Training ended, and everyone went home. I told myself it was just exhaustion messing with all of us. Field stress, hallucinations, pareidolia, whatever explanation helped me sleep. But sometimes when it rains at night, I swear I can hear that same slapping sound outside my window. It's probably just water pooling in the gutters. Probably. Maybe or maybe not. Story number 6. I've been in the Army for almost a decade and thought I'd gotten over being scared of anything short of a drone strike, or I guess my own mind. But what happened last month at my house is something I'm still trying to explain, and honestly, I don't even know what happened. All I know is that it rattled me in a way I wasn't ready for, and now sometimes at night I listen for sounds I shouldn't be hearing. I was on leave back home, a normal rental in Ohio. Nothing weird about it. My girlfriend and I had been staying there a couple years. It was a basic old house. I never really liked the basement. It was maybe Saturday. That afternoon, I dozed off on the couch, the kind of nap where you wake up half suffocated in your own sweat, disoriented and unsure what year it is. I remember blinking against the dim orange light of evening, filtering through the blinds when I heard it. Soft, broken sobbing. It sounded like my girlfriend. It came from somewhere deeper in the house, muffled but distinct. I sat up, trying to shake off the sleep. She'd gone to the grocery store an hour earlier, but maybe she came back early. The sound was faint at first, like someone crying into a towel. Then it grew sharper, the hiccuping kind of crying that makes your chest ache to hear. I followed it to the hallway, then to the top of the spiral staircase that led down to our finished basement. The air there was colder, damp from the blizzard earlier that week. The crying got louder as I descended, unmistakably female, desperate, and coming from behind the half-bath door at the bottom. That door was always open. We barely used that bathroom, but now it was shut tight. No light showed through the gap under it. My first thought was that maybe she was hurt, maybe she slipped or got sick. But then my brain caught up with me. I'd watched her drive off earlier. Her car wasn't in the driveway. I froze halfway down the stairs. The sobbing continued for another few seconds, loud and real enough to make my chest clench. I called out to her in a whispered voice. As soon as I made any sound, the crying stopped. Instantly, nothing left but my own pulse in my ears. That silence was brutal. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, listening. No breathing, no rustling. Just the faint hum of the dehumidifier somewhere in the back of the basement. Finally, I forced myself down the rest of the stairs. I thought maybe I was imagining things. Sleep paralysis, PTSD nightmare, something. I made myself touch the doorknob. It was icy cold, almost wet, which was another thing that made no sense. When I pushed the bathroom door open, it moved without resistance. The small room was pitch black, but the bulb flicked on with a buzz when I hit the switch. Empty. Toilet lit up. Mirror fogged from what looked like fresh condensation. A puddle by the sink that hadn't been there before. The smell hit next. Something metallic and sour, like something had been left there to decompose. I remember looking up at the vent above the toilet and noticing that it was rattling slightly, though the fan wasn't on. And then I felt a sudden tap on my shoulders. I jolted and looked back. There was no one, but suddenly the only bulb on the staircase started flickering, and then it went out. I don't know how long I stood there, but just as I was about to leave, something clung to my clothes like a hand tugging at the edges. And then the lights came back, but this time something pooled beneath me. I don't know what it was, but it instantly gave me that icky feeling, like something was not right. I started to feel itchy all around my body. I started scratching myself violently. No matter how much I scratched, nothing worked. My scratches became violent to the extent that they started bleeding, but I didn't stop. It was this uncontrollable feeling. Maybe someone didn't want me to stop. And then I heard it again. The sobbing, but this time, it didn't come from the bathroom. It was right behind me. I spun around so fast I hit my shoulder on the doorframe. Nothing there. The light flickered again. I bolted. I don't even remember climbing the stairs except I almost tripped on the last stair. By the time I got to the living room, the sun had fully set. The lights upstairs flickered once and then steadied, like nothing had happened. The house was too still again. I checked the front door. Locked. Windows shut. My phone showed no missed calls or messages. Her car still wasn't outside. I sat on the couch, heart still hammering, and told myself I'd dreamed it. That maybe I'd woken in one of those half-sleep states where reality bends. I tried to text my girlfriend, but the screen kept glitching. Trying to play it sane, I set the TV to sports, drank some water, and tried to forget about it. But at some point I felt dizzy and weird, like someone was tugging at my spine. I don't know how else to describe it. The next thing I remember, I'm on the grass out behind our house. My hands were scraped up, and my skin had gone pale in the cold. My girlfriend was kneeling beside me, shaking me awake. She said she found me lying near the basement window, unresponsive. Apparently, I'd been out there for almost 2 hours. She said the basement lights had been flickering nonstop. I had no idea how I'd gotten there. I remembered lying on the couch, but not leaving the house. My keys were still inside, the doors locked from within. Later that night, I went down to the basement again. She refused to come with me. Everything looked normal. The puddle was gone. The mirror was clean. Even the footprints had vanished. The only strange thing was the vent above the toilet. It was slightly ajar, like someone had pried it loose from the inside. I can't explain any of it. A few days later, while fixing the loose vent, I found something wedged deep in the duct. A small clump of long, dark hair tied with a red elastic band. My girlfriend's hair is blonde. She swore she'd never seen it before. All evening, I kept seeing shadows at the edges of the rooms. The feeling I got, like I'd been in two places at once, lingered. Later that night, I kept jerking awake, convinced I heard footsteps on the spiral stairs or the distant sound of crying. I keep telling myself that it was just a mix of sleep and an overactive imagination. Maybe my brain spliced some dream over reality, and stress did the rest. I wish I fully believed it, but even now I still don't have an answer as to how and why I was lying on the ground. Story number 7. When I got stationed at the Marine Barracks in Washington, D.C., I was more nervous about inspection drills than ghosts. My duty station was in the Commandant's house, which is a real old mansion-looking place. White pillars, creaky wood floors, all of it. It smelled stale, kind of like an attic combined with fresh floor polish, which gave me headaches. I still remember the quiet ticking of the old wall clocks, echoing through the long hallways. The place had heavy furniture that probably hadn't been moved since the 1800s. The portraits stared down from the walls, each one painted with eyes that caught light in a weird way. At first, I chalked it up to tiredness. The first weird thing happened around 1:40 a.m. I was doing my rounds when I passed a portrait of a commandant from the 1800s. Stern face, white beard. I swear the frame rattled slightly as I walked by. I stopped, figuring maybe I'd brushed it with my shoulder. But before I could move again, the nail gave out and the whole thing crashed to the floor. The glass cracked right through his eyes. No breeze, no reason, just down on the ground. I picked it up, put it back, but I had goosebumps all over my neck. I brushed it off as bad hanging, cheap wire, whatever. But it happened again, 3 nights later. A different portrait, different hall, picked up and set back down. I told myself it was humidity, old nails, old plaster. That kind of stuff happens. But I was still not fully convinced. Over the next few nights, little things kept happening. There were cold spots that moved. Once I stood in a hallway where the air felt icy even though it was midsummer outside. On my 4th month, I moved posts down the road to the Navy Yard, big brick buildings dating to the Civil War. Guys swore an old admiral's rocking chair would move on its own at night. I used to laugh that off until my first midnight patrol. I had to check Building 86, the ancient one with 2 stories and those warped, clouded windows. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness, and everything echoed. There, at the end of the 2nd floor landing, was that famous rocking chair, tall-backed, with cracked paint and something like iron nails showing through the wood. Absolutely still when I entered. I walked past and heard a scratching noise, slow at first, then steady. I turned around and for a moment, I thought that the chair was floating a few inches above the ground. And then, there was a faint thud noise. When I took a closer look at the chair, it was on the ground. It felt as if someone had been holding the chair and then kept it down without making much noise. I waited for a few seconds, watched, breath held, and then I forced myself to finish my check and move on. But every muscle in my body was tight after that. On the other night, while I was checking doors on the 3rd floor, I heard this faint tapping sounds, slow footsteps echoing from around the corner. I figured it was another guard. I called out, but no one answered. The tapping kept getting closer, steady and slow. When I turned the corner, there was nothing but a pair of old black shoes gliding down the hall, like someone invisible was wearing them. They turned the corner and vanished. I didn't tell anyone. You don't want to be that guy who saw something. But after that, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even when nothing happened, there was this constant tension in the air, like the whole place was holding its breath. It got worse with time. I remember one night I found that rocking chair in the corner of one of the drawing rooms. Didn't even know it was there before. The thing started moving, just a little, back and forth. No breeze, no air vent near it. I froze and watched. It stopped the moment I took a step closer. When I backed up, it started again. I don't know how long I stood there just staring at it, but at some point the chair tilted so far forward I thought it would topple over, then snapped back and stayed still. The next morning, the chair was gone. No one knew what I was talking about. After that, sleep got weird. I'd dream of the portraits, of those painted eyes following me down the hallway. Once I woke up to the sound of boots walking just outside my door, measured, deliberate steps. When I opened it, the corridor was empty. Things started happening too often after that. Doors that had been locked opened by themselves. The smell came next. A mix of oil, sweat, and something sour, like old breath. It would appear suddenly, linger for a few minutes, then vanish. Always when I was alone. By the end of my rotation there, I'd stopped trying to explain it. One night, I was standing near the main staircase, looking up at the portraits, when I noticed something new. A faint smudge of soot ran across the ceiling, tracing a path between several of the paintings, like something had drifted along the plaster, touching each one. I followed it with my flashlight until I reached the far wall. It ended above an empty nail, one where a portrait used to hang. I don't remember dropping my flashlight, but I remember the sound of it clattering and rolling across the floor. When I bent to grab it, I saw what looked like boot prints in the dust. Small, faint, leading away from that empty spot. The prints stopped halfway across the hall, as if whoever made them had just disappeared. I never reported any of it. When my rotation ended, I left that post without looking back. I visited DC years later and walked by the barracks, just out of curiosity. Everything looked the same, spotless, quiet, perfect. But even standing on the sidewalk, I could feel it, that same pressure in the air. Sometimes I wonder if what I saw was just stress. Long shifts, low sleep, imagination running wild. Maybe the portraits fell because of vibrations. Maybe the rocking chair had loose joints. Maybe the shoes were a prank. But there's one thing that never sat right with me. On my last night, I found a single dusty footprint in the hallway, smaller than mine, like a child's. It pointed straight toward the commandant's office door. The door was locked from the inside, and no one's had the key for decades.